Last episode, we left Baki right as he finished his training to defeat the Yasha Ape. In the process, he had put on 20 pounds on his frame, which made a massive difference in his appearance. While he did look buff at an athletic 156 pounds, bulking up to almost 180 pounds at a height of 5 feet 2 while still staying relatively low in body fat turned him into a tank. He achieved that transformation by following an intense resistance training routine that I already detailed in the anime workout series. By consuming upwards of 10,000 calories per day and putting his body through an intense full body routine, he pushed the limits of his muscles and forced them to hypertrophy at a rapid rate, to accommodate for the incredibly hostile environment he put himself in. Taking full advantage of the fact that bulks make you look much more massive in closes, Baki takes every opportunity to show off his gains. Be it while wearing a t-shirt to expose the guns or when he's rocking the Gakuran, Japan's official school uniform for boys, there's no ignoring his new swagger. Besides the show muscles that would be those of the arms, shoulders and chest, the bulk of the mass he's gained is in his upper back and posterior chain, as the author so tastefully underlines. These are the muscles that make a real difference when it comes to combatability, as they promote both the strength of the blows and the power production needed to transfer the energy from the ground into the punches or kicks. On top of looking ridiculously thick, Baki's attitude is also completely different. He, who was prone to fits of anger and was often override by frustration, seemed to have found his stride. Instead of starting fights out of spite, his inferiority complex has been replaced by a certain air of impishness, showing that he now fully enjoys confrontation, not simply as a way to get stronger, but also for the sole purpose of having a good time. He's also gotten to a level of strength that makes him completely immune to blunt weapons. Getting attacked by a knife-wielding delinquent doesn't even faze him, as he easily takes control of the weapon. To establish his superiority, he makes a show of biting the blade off of the guard, demonstrating that he now possesses abilities that make him superhuman. That excitation for combat manifested itself for the first time during his bout against the Yasha Ape. Once he managed to surpass the feeling of fear that fights to the death naturally invoke in man, he was able to tap into an unlimited amount of animalistic energy that helped him push the limits of his body and mind much further than the average human. This new skill came in handy for his fight against Hanayama, which I covered in the Manga motivation playlist. Both of the fighters took in more than what most would consider a reasonable amount of damage, forcing each other to get better and more ruthless as the bout went on. Besides the purely physical aspect of the encounter, they also managed to create a strong connection with one another, oscillating between rivalry and friendship. This ability to connect with his opponents is what makes Baki so special. Keep in mind that the original series started publishing in Shonen Jump in 1991, with our hero predating protagonists like Luffy or Naruto by more than 5 years. Back then, the idea that a fighter would feel anything but contempt or hatred for his enemies was almost unheard of. It creates a strong opposition between Yujiro, who treats the men he fights as nothing else but disposable trash to be thrown away once he's done, with Baki, who not only does not kill the people he fights, but also makes friends out of them. This is a radical change from his past self. As he states himself, everything in his life to this point was done to defeat his fighter. But now, and for the first time in his life, he is letting his actions differ from the mold he was born into. He has envisioned a world where one can become stronger without having to kill others. Instead, he believes in the power of human connection and the strength that can be born from learning and connecting with people, instead of just using them as stepping stones. That spirit of emancipation is of course not to the liking of Yujiro at all. Not satisfied with simply crashing the fight with Hanayama, he also made sure to question his methods, claiming that whatever steps he thought he had taken forward actually amounted to nothing when faced with real strength. Outside of him just being the devil, the psychological explanation behind that sabotaging behavior comes from the fact that Yuji really wants Baki to become strong and pose him a real threat, but he's just not patient enough to wait for that. And because he wishes for his son to obtain power quickly, he actively seeks to force him to stick to what he believes is the best way to do so. For Yujiro Hanma, who has always seen life as a one-way track to worldwide domination, the idea that one could become friends with his opponents is laughable. And since he's not the live and let live type of guy, he had no issues seeking out the Yasha Ape and bringing his head to Baki to let him know what's what. Not only does he get rid of a potential distraction for his son, he also shows him that having loved ones make people soft and susceptible to failure. In reality, all he's accomplished is to make Baki hate him even more, but that's still a net positive for him. Besides Baki's character evolution, it is interesting to note that this can be pinpointed as the moment in the series when his physique stops looking natural. Regardless of his stats, most people would argue that this amount of muscularity is only possible in the realm of enhanced bodybuilding. I would personally disagree, to an extent. When we look at the front, we see that Baki's frame is still as small as ever, with short clavicles and a large waist. However, the amount of mass packed on it gives the illusion of size. To me, this is still achievable naturally. The back, however, is a different story. The amount of size and definition there is absolutely astounding, which isn't surprising since the upper back is the genetic strong suit of the Hanma bloodline. With extremely well developed traps and lats, Baki's rump is the real deal. And yet, I still believe that we're bordering on what could be announced impossible for natural bodybuilders to accomplish. Considering how underdeveloped this area is in most lifters, one can imagine a world where the limits of what is considered possible are pushed back, creating a whole new standard for upper back thickness and size. What is and will remain out of the ordinary, however, is the use that Baki makes of this body. To achieve that amount of size at that low level of body fat, you'd need to specialize entirely in bodybuilding. But for Baki, the look of his muscles is just an afterthought, with fighting being his main focus. This is expressed through his training, which is centered around explosive calisthenic movements, grappling flexibility, and striking. The Yasha Ape arc was just a bulking interlude in what mostly constitutes standard martial arts practice, for the simple reason that Baki is not a bodybuilder, he's a fighter. I might make a video talking about the differences in training between the two, but for now all you have to know is that despite his mass, Baki is still as nimble and fast as ever, which would of course not be possible in real life due to specialization. Talking about specialization, Baki's training camp before his fight against Yujiro consists in an immersion-type survival challenge, where the goal is to survive in the wild for as long as possible. Of course, to make things more difficult, he is being parachuted in the middle of a forest used for military exercises. In it, he will have to compete against the cream of the crop of the most skilled and ruthless soldiers in Japan, mimicking the insane guerrilla regimen that Yujiro puts himself through at the same age during the Vietnam War. Despite the inherent danger of this scenario, his spirit looks to be relatively unchanged, and he approaches the challenge with the light-hearted behavior that we've gotten used to. Sadly for him, this innocence of sorts is of great disservice to his cause as he immediately gets captured. Trouble finds him the second he steps foot in the forest, as opposed to his fight with the Yasha Ape, where he had the luxury to train and pick the moment of the confrontation. Without going into too much details as to how he evaded, as this will be the topic of another video, Baki eventually turns the tide on his opponents and starts to hunt them down to hone his skills. In doing so, he demonstrates his frightening ability to adapt to new environments, as he masters the art of guerrilla warfare in less than a day, completing his arsenal of grappling skills. In terms of stats, we get differing information here. The platoon seems to estimate his weight to be at around 65-66 kilograms, but Gaia, who is actually picking him up, says it's more around 80 kilograms. There is a strong chance that the soldiers underestimated his weight due to his apparent childlike face, which they quickly came to regret. And since Gaia is the head of the troop, we'll assume that he's correct, which means that Baki has held onto the masses belt to face the Yasha Ape, and embrace the bulky Baki status. We'll see in later parts that this eventually comes to change. That additional muscle is an invaluable ally when it comes to power, as showcased by Baki's insane feats of strength. At 13, he was already able to jump clear out of a pond using only one limb, which speaks to the immense amount of motor units he must have in his legs and glutes to be able to propel himself in the air like that. His upper body is not lagging too far behind, as the muscles of his core, neck and upper back are potent enough to let him escape a headlock using brute strength only. This is where all of the resistance training from the past pays off. He's not only able to deliver quick strikes and evade blows, but also to get himself out of tight spots by abusing the size difference with smaller opponents, which is a valuable trait to possess as a grappler. While the fight against Hanayama highlighted the importance of technique and speed, the suicide mission into the jungle showcased the supremacy of a well-developed physique over weaker opponents, and offers a booming contradiction to the idea that grapplers can only get big at the cost of their fighting prowess. Being fully confident in his build and not being one to shy away from a good boast, Baki even goes as far as to tank punches with his core, breaking his opponent's wrist in the process. While I wouldn't encourage you to try that in real life, there's no denying that this is one of the best flex in shonen manga, both literally and figuratively. That level of bravado and confidence doesn't change the fact that Baki holds no ill will against the man he defeats. While intense and ruthless in battle, his demeanor immediately changes once the bout is over, and the confrontation ends in a friendly fashion, but always with a cheeky flair that now characterizes our boy, who didn't bother to remember everyone's name and simply christened one of the soldiers that knife-wielding guy. On the other side of that wholesome attitude is the demented passion of his mother, who is eager to offer her son as a sacrifice to the ogre, in order to secure his love and affection. The mother-son relationship and the entire dynamics of the Hanma family will be discussed in a later video, but for now let's just sum it up by quoting Stridham: "This isn't right." This amorality of sorts seeps into Baki's character, who seemed to lose his amicable nature for a spell and reverts back to his old edgy way, hiding his anxiety behind a mask of taunts and fake aggressivity. On the eve of his fight against Yujiro, the tension of the whole event weighs heavily on his shoulders, as he is once again reminded that he was given birth for the sole purpose of providing his father with an enjoyable fight before getting consumed. All this is still not enough to completely drown out his real nature, that of a respectable and friendly boy, but it does cover it with a veil of detachment, as if he wasn't really there. In a sense, his spirit has already departed his body, as he is preparing for what he thinks will be the last fight of his life. This spleen is not added by the violent behavior of his mother, who holds him responsible for the fact that Yujiro, his father, has deserted her life. Convinced that he would have stuck around had Baki been stronger, she takes her sadness out on her only son, who doesn't even try to block, appalled by the level of sorrow that only a motherly beating can provoke. On a mission to get any semblance of respect, pride and love from his parent, Baki reaches the area where the fight is to take place. There, he once again demonstrates the incredible level of fitness and strength he was able to obtain with such a small body, being able to lift a giant using only the power of his legs and upper back. After being pinned against Hanayama, it becomes clear that he is now at a level that far surpasses that of his rival. In only a short amount of time, Baki has elevated his fighting skills tenfold, leaving his past opponents in the dust. After multiple fights against a select panel of opponents, he is finally ready to face the ogre. In total, Baki warmed up for 12 hours non-stop, facing sparring partner after sparring partner, without so much as a break. As Yuri states, that's a level of stamina that's far beyond human. And when you take into account that he'd been doing all of this, carrying around 50 pounds of diving weights, you come to understand how advanced the development in his physique has been from part 1 to part 2. The time spent in the jungle facing off against mercenaries has taken his muscles to another level, with him looking more massive than ever. As an apart, it's also great to see Baki follow the science path and training while weighted. This doesn't mean that it would work in real life, but it's definitely a cool trope that I always like to see revisited in fighting mangas. On top of that, he also added weight to the sole of his shoes, making them weigh 2 kilograms more each. Baki once again demonstrates that he only really comes alive when he talks about fighting or is actively engaged in a bout, which is ironic considering this is also the activity during which he is supposed to be losing his life. All of that work, all of that energy and passion culminate in his fight against Yujiro. Every single adversary he defeated, every training session he endured, and really every single thing he has done in his life up to this point has led him to this very moment. And yet, in walking towards this fateful encounter with his father, Baki has discovered that there exist other things out there for him to exist for, and that the very action of fighting in itself was not only reserved to the hopeless pursuit of a fight against the ogre, but could also lead him on a different path altogether, that he started to envision in his fight against the Yasha Ape, Hanayama, and Gaia. The conclusion of that fight and of this Grappler Baki arc led to a new era for our hero, and leaves us with a lot of things to discuss, from the type of training he endured, to the twisted relationship with his parents, and even down to his struggles against depression and feelings of meaninglessness. But when it comes to the development of Baki Hanma, that will have to wait for another episode of Manga.